We are back, and we are joined now by Luke Savage, writer in Toronto, whose work you can read in The Atlantic, The Guardian, The New Statesman, and more, including at Jacobin, where Luke is the columnist. Luke, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So obviously, major political news in Canada right now, an upheaval. Trudeau is facing calls for his resignation. His finance minister, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who was previously a pretty staunch ally of his, resigned earlier this week. And this, at least in terms of how the media is covering it, really centers around Trump's tariff threats, at least on its face. But if you could give people a broader context into the kind of, I guess, abandoning of Trudeau from his own allies this week.
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'd say about that is that I think the Trump tariff threat is really less the cause of Chrystia Freeland's resignation and the sort of chaos we're seeing in the government right now than, it's more the occasion for those things than the cause. The government has been unpopular for quite some time. Trudeau himself is personally very unpopular. The government has suffered a number of pretty significant by-election defeats, beginning with one in the summer in which they lost a seat in downtown Toronto that was kind of considered unlosable. They actually lost another one by over 30 points on Monday night. So the same day of Chrystia Freeland's resignation, the Liberals lost a by-election in British Columbia. And there have been a whole bunch of other cabinet ministers that have left over the last little while, lots of MPs saying they're not running for re-election, that kind of thing. There have been a number of, I wouldn't call them attempts to oust Trudeau, but there have been, instances of 20 or so Liberal MPs signing onto letters calling for him to go or asking him to reflect, that sort of thing. So all of this is really, I think, the culmination of a process that's been going on for some time. And, Freeland's resignation, I think, is really just a sign that anybody that has significant political ambitions of their own, as she obviously does, the opportunity cost of remaining in the government at this point and continuing to be associated with Trudeau is just too high.
And in terms of his lack of political capital, let's compare here. This was in late November 30th. Trudeau flew down to Mar-a-Lago to break bread with Donald Trump. This photo obviously went everywhere. Trump feeling like a kingmaker, whatever. And then compare that to this response from Claudia Sheinbaum, the other North American subject of these tariff threats, who said this a few days earlier. 70% of the illegal weapons seized from criminals in Mexico come from your country. We do not produce these weapons, nor do we consume synthetic drugs. Tragically, it is our country that lives are lost to the violence resulting from meeting the drug demand in yours. So compare that to Trudeau going down and kissing the ring. Obviously Morena and Sheinbaum are just like significantly more popular in Mexico, and we can talk about why that is. They're actually delivering for people, as did AMLO. But the difference in their political standing and the fact, in my view, that Mexico is much more likely to actually be the subject of tariffs than Canada is because of the jingoism involved, just shows how weak Trudeau looks in this current moment compared to, and how weak, honestly, his political position is compared to Sheinbaum down in Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the entire Canadian political class has basically been caught on the back foot with this Trump tariff threat. There's been, I don't think, a very coherent response. There have been kind of different responses, both from the federal government and from various premiers who have a lot of power in Canada. The provinces are quite powerful. And they've kind of oscillated between trying to meet fire with fire, as it were, and kind of saying, well, if Trump, does this tariff, this new tariff, we'll do tariffs of our own. We'll start a trade war. And, going back and forth between that and, well, Trump has legitimate, the Americans have legitimate concerns. We're going to fund the border better. We're going to do, this or that, et cetera, et cetera. The federal government's response, I think, has been similarly a little bit confused. And I don't know, there probably is a fair amount of political capital Trudeau might have gained. I mean, this is just speculative, but by kind of meeting Trump's tariff threat in a more nationalist way. But I think the fact that he didn't, I mean, it could just be a reflection of his lack of political judgment, or as you suggest, it could also just be because his own position is incredibly weak right now.
And can you give people a sense of Trudeau's history as the leader of the Liberals in Canada, his tenures as prime minister, and really, I guess, what led to this moment where he had a high 60 or mid 60 approval rating, I think, at his apex, and now he's really at quite a low. I mean, I think I saw something like 28% in a Vox article that I read.
Yeah, well, in 2015, Trudeau led the Liberals to this big majority government, and he led them there from actually a historic low. They were, for the first time in their history, in third place. I mean, they got absolutely decimated in the 2011 federal election. So Trudeau led them back to power, and I would say between kind of November of 2015, when he won the election, and maybe some way through 2017, he really was able to, maintain his popularity, I think, with a strong assist from the U.S. media and the global media more generally, because he became this sort of de facto anti-Trump resistance figure. And he didn't actually have to do a great deal in order to have that mantle, but it was something that, was kind of assigned to him, and it worked very well. But in 2019 and 2021, the last two times there have been federal elections, the Liberals have won in terms of winning the most seats, but they've actually lost the popular vote on both of those occasions to pretty replacement level Tory leaders. I won't bore your viewers by explaining who Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole are, but suffice it to say, these are not heavyweight politicians. They're very kind of bland and generic center-right figures. And in 2021, I mean, I think this is really where we might begin the story up to the current moment. The Liberals Trudeau calls a federal election and really tries to set it up as this, the most important election since 1945, that kind of thing. So he's calling the election early. He's seeking a mandate. And that election goes very badly. Basically, very few people care that there's an election. There's almost no net change in terms of seats. And so the Liberals ended up exactly where they were before, more or less, which is that they're relying on other parties in the House of Commons to maintain themselves. And they've been able to do that throughout the past several years, partly by entering into this confidence and supply arrangement with the NDP, which is the Social Democratic Party and currently the fourth largest party in Parliament. So the NDP entered into this agreement in exchange for a number of concessions, expansion of public dental care, expansion of pharmaceutical coverage, anti-scab legislation in federally regulated industries, things like that. The NDP pulled out of the deal in September, so a year early. And that's made the government look even more precarious. And so, I mean, that's kind of really what brought us to the present. But I think over the past couple of years, the cost of living crisis in Canada has only gotten worse. And the government really hasn't, Trudeau has not really had, I think, any significant response to it. There's actually, I think, a very direct parallel, or a number of direct parallels one could draw with Joe Biden here.
Right.
In terms of, outstaying, a liberal politician very much outstaying their welcome, remaining in place despite the fact that they're dragging their own party down quite visibly. But also, I think, in terms of just being very disconnected from the actual sources of national discontent. Trudeau, like Biden, I think, largely thinks that his standing in the polls is like a problem of morale. Basically thinks the economy is more or less doing fine. And, it's just people's perceptions of it that are wrong or something like that. Very similar to the kinds of things we saw leading up to the U.S. election in a lot of liberal circles. So I really think where we're at now is just a reflection of the government has been out of gas for a long time. And its front man is a really unpopular figure whose position has been untenable for quite a while.
And it appears like the Conservatives winning in the elections next year is all but an inevitability, basically, based on his lack of popularity. Can you speak to that and how they're maybe approaching their kind of criticisms of Trudeau that may be breaking through?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the Tories have had a lead in the polls for, I mean, at least 2 years now, possibly longer. And the lead's quite significant at this point. I mean, we're talking about a double-digit lead, so more than enough to secure a majority government. And I mean, the big change in the Conservative Party really came in 2022 when they elected Pierre Poilievre as their new leader. Poilievre, I think, is partly, he's doing well, partly just because the government's quite unpopular, and the Conservatives, and Liberals have historically just kind of traded places as the two ruling parties in Canada. And so when one gets unpopular, the other tends to just, in a very general way, I think, reap some of the benefits of their opponents' unpopularity. But Pierre Poilievre is kind of an unusual figure. I mean, he's both unusual and utterly generic. He's utterly generic in the sense that he's a pure creature of the Canadian conservative movement, but he is also, somebody who's, I guess, connected to some of the weirder parts of conservatism, the extremely online parts. When he was running for the Tory leadership, he liked to do campaign events where he would buy shawarma with Bitcoin, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say those things have helped his popularity, but he's also talked a lot about just the cost of living crisis in a very bread and butter way that isn't exactly as ideologically coded. And I think to a lot of people sounds kind of vaguely anti-establishment. So he's attacked the Bank of Canada a fair bit over inflation. I mean, it's not clear. He said he would fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. It's not really clear to me if Poilievre had been prime minister. I suspect the Bank of Canada would have pursued exactly the same, jacking up interest rates policy. But that stuff has worked fairly well for him. He's a performer. He has used the House of Commons to generate YouTube content, and all of that has worked very well in a context where the Liberals don't really have a narrative of their own, and Justin Trudeau is so incredibly unpopular.
And I mean, there's so many through lines here, frankly, with some of this conservative faux populism that we're seeing. It's almost as if it's this embrace of a direct communication style, even if that you're saying a bunch of BS when you're communicating. And also this almost anarcho-capitalist, Javier Milei thing, embracing of speculation and Bitcoin, and almost anti-society, just this libertarianism that feels like it's also very relevant here.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, another part of that, which is I think worked very well for Poilievre, is just he's shown a willingness to talk in ways that I don't know. In my experience, anyway, conservatives in both Canada and the United States and elsewhere have, up until a few years ago, they didn't like to talk about workers directly. I think they would have seen that as kind of uncouth, and maybe someone like Poilievre would have even seen that as sort of communistic, to talk about workers. But he's started doing that, and I think it's worked very well. I mean, one of the big question marks right now is what a Poilievre government would actually do, because some of the things that he's endorsed in the past are extremely radical. I mean, he's still officially committed to defunding Canada's public broadcaster, the CBC. He's, talked about, I mean, this is probably 10 years ago now or so. He's talked about bringing right to work laws to Canada, that sort of thing. But right now, the Conservatives don't have much of a positive program they're offering. They have, facts about the cost of living crisis, facts about food bank usage, that sort of thing. They're talking about addressing the housing crisis by, I don't know, getting housing built, presumably by cutting regulations and giving tax breaks to developers, that kind of thing. But yeah, in terms of how radical they would go and whether they would actually go in a sort of Javier Milei direction, It's not clear to me yet.
And I guess in terms of the political ambitions of other liberals, right? Is there any kind of sense that, or perhaps it's better to talk about the New Democratic Party and their role in this? Has that leadership been effective at pushing Trudeau in any way? Is there a reckoning happening within that party? Because as you say, they got some concessions, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be addressing like how expensive housing is, for example.
Well, there were some housing items in that deal as well. The deal's pretty extensive, and people can read it online if they're interested. And there's also different parts of it have gotten finished or not finished to varying degrees. I mean, I think that the strategic bind that the New Democratic Party finds itself in really has to do with there's a difficult dance that Jagmeet Singh, the leader, has to perform now, because on the one hand, he is trying to oppose the government in all kinds of areas, but he has also, been in this agreement with them until it was just in September that he pulled out of the deal, and so now he's calling for Trudeau personally to go, but it's not clear how the NDP would vote if there was a no confidence motion to bring down the government when Parliament resumes at the end of January. So it's a difficult dance. My sense, and I'm just speculating here, is that when the NDP negotiated that deal with the Liberals, there was partly a strategic calculation. The party wanted these things, these concessions, but there was also a strategic calculation that the deal might benefit the NDP electorally, and so far that doesn't seem to have been the case, because the Conservatives were very good at associating the NDP with the Liberals, and so I think that is the principal kind of strategic dilemma for Canada's Social Democratic Party at the moment.
And lastly, I guess, what's your do you think Trudeau steps aside, or do you think he kind of holds on through the elections? And will there be internal pressure by the Liberals because they're worried about their chances with a guy at the top of the ticket who's not even cracking 30% approval in some polls?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I mean, there are no really formal mechanisms. I mean, especially now that Parliament's not sitting, there's no formal way that Trudeau could be ousted. And honestly, even if Parliament were sitting, Canada is not like Australia or Britain in terms of parties or Parliament having these built-in internal mechanisms for ousting a sitting prime minister. So really, the only pressure that can be brought to bear on Trudeau from his own party is kind of signing open letters and MPs talking to the media and that sort of thing. So the ball really is in his court, and I wouldn't want to be too confident in any particular prediction about what he's going to do. I mean, in theory, he's on holiday now and he's thinking about it. He's canceled all of his end of the year interviews with the big networks and stuff. So we have no idea what he's thinking at the moment. But I will say that nothing that Trudeau has done or said so far has indicated to me that he, I mean, he doesn't want to step aside, and he's every part of his political identity is telling him not to step aside. And so even if that means, he goes into next year with a 20% approval rating, unless something changes or there's a significant escalation and pressure to get him out of there, I'm not sure he can be moved.
Well, Luke Savage, really appreciate your time today explaining what is happening over there up north. Where can people find your work?
Best place to find me is at Luke W. Savage on, on the artist formerly known as Twitter. You can find me there.
I refuse to use the other name, so I appreciate you also having that proclivity. Thanks so much, Luke. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Emma.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.